Welcome back to the Entertainment Room. I'm doing some quick movie reviews today with films I watched over the course of this week. I can try and make this a weekly thing, but with life, work, all that shit, I can't for sure make that promise, but I will do my best. So how this will work is that I will discuss a bit about each film that I recently watched, and I will go over each without spoilers. And then at the very end, I will go over each one again, that time with spoilers that I just feel are worth discussing, as far as what I got from the film. And these movies could be any genre. And as a matter of fact, I have the most interesting range of genres today, so I hope that's cool because that's just how I roll most of the time. So I even have a mini series on here. So my selections are The Beauty Queen Killer, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, Fright Night, Legally Blonde, The Tunnel, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, and Catch Me If You Can. So without wasting any more time, let's get into it. So the first selection today is a true crime miniseries called The Beauty Queen Killer, 9 Days of Terror, and is on Hulu. It follows Tina Rosico, a woman who at 16 years old was kidnapped by a serial killer named Chris Wilder, who often preyed on young girls and women, posing as a photographer and manager. And she is captured and held captive for 9 days and ultimately survives. And she was initially viewed as a victim over the course of those days, based on some decisions that were made along the way. She was starting to be looked at as more as an accomplice. But my wife and I went on vacation this past week to and from Orlando, and we listened to the Crime Junkies podcast, so we were in the mood for a little more true crime. So, here we are. So anyway, this sick motherfucker traveled all through, like, California to Miami and shit by car, killing women, and he had quite the number of victims. And this doc was disturbing, for sure, hearing people sit through recounting all the abuse and the choices they had to make. And there is this stigma about women in particular being questioned about, something traumatic happens to them, and it's just far too common and far too inappropriate for this to happen. But some people will just sit back and look at somebody's terrible experience and just blindly ask, oh, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you run? And those questions, no matter what, should just never be asked, especially by somebody who doesn't know them well, but really anybody. People just think they know better in hindsight and just think that, that ability is all the same, even if it is in a life or death situation. We just don't know how we will react until we are there, and some of our decisions may be baffling to us later. But each individual's instincts work differently, so it's just not fair at all in most cases to judge somebody else and how they responded to that stimulus. But with Tina, she is obviously a victim, but at the time she made some choices during her capture that raised some eyebrows. There are people who still don't trust her to this day, as far as her character, so you'll have to decide what you think. And I'll get to those points more in spoilers later, but I think the main thing I got out of this doc was just, further proof that people think they know better in every situation, and people will take limited information and run with it, and judge, and more often than not, just be hateful. And I knew this already, but that just doesn't make it any less sad to see it unfold all over again. But overall, it is a well done miniseries. It keeps you invested. You get different perspectives, survivor stories, family members with missing or deceased victims, giving their sides and their opinions on Tina as well as Chris Wilder, their experiences. So, opinions on handling of the investigation also. It's not the most life-changing piece, but it's one that will get you thinking and further make you weary of the world and the people in it, most notably the people who just seem like the most friendly and the most innocent. Just really makes you paranoid. So I'll give it an 8.2 out of 10. Now, on a much lighter note now is a rom-com that has become, I guess, a modern-day classic. At first time watch for me, I finally got around to, and that is How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, from 2003, starring Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson. So we have two different people with two different goals. Hudson is Andy, and she has to write an article on, well, how to lose a guy in 10 days, all the standard mistakes women typically make that kind of push a man away quickly, but she meets Ben, who has basically the opposite goal of getting a woman to fall in love with him in 10 days, so 10 being the magic number here. So they are going back and forth with these conflicting goals, and they are both clearly at a stalemate. And when it comes to rom-coms, there are several that I like. I'm not afraid to admit it. They're often cheesy and predictable, and this movie isn't super different from that, but they can have a charm to them. In this case, this one is incredibly charming, I would say. It's not always about the unpredictability of where the story takes us. That's often not important here. It's about the journey and how entertaining that journey is. Do we buy into our characters and their chemistry? Is it funny? And in this case, for me, I buy into most things. And McConaughey and Hudson work off each other pretty well. She's clingy, over the top, emotional. He's a bit of a douche in a way, but he's also trying to hold it all together and hold on to the relationship for his purposes, which baffles her because they are not aware of the other's goal. When it comes to the ethical aspect, clearly both are in the wrong. Andy is clearly selling her performance, making his life hell, and just embarrassing him every chance she gets, while he is handing all these red flags, but sticks to it just for his job performance and an opportunity he's being given. So despite what it may do to her later, and her feelings later. So as an audience, we are just kind of left with a fairly stress-free, fun viewing of two initially selfish people, failing at their greedy tasks, and I just laughed a lot. Now, I think men and women viewers can laugh a lot at both sides, and maybe even cringe at some of the relatable tropes of these various red flags that we prefer not to see in our own lives. And these two leads have, in my opinion, funny friends as well at their sides, some great actors around them who just drive the drama and the comedy home even further. And with the romantic chemistry, it is there. Some of the transitions of scenes and relationships I found to be a bit abrupt and rushed, but nothing that ruined the movie or anything or should be counted out in the end, so I will get into some specifics again in the spoilers section, but for now, I'll leave my rating at a 7.7 out of 10. Fright Night is an 80s vampire film that took me way too long to watch. I saw the remake when it first came out years ago, but I remember nothing, but I do know it's a shame that I did not experience this one first. And Charlie has a vampire moving next door, and he struggles to try and prove it. And for an 80s horror film, it definitely has that campiness to it. Charming campiness overall, but campiness. But the impressive thing is that it does not often hinder the suspense that the film builds. I didn't find it scary really, but Chris Sarandon as the creature of the night Jerry Dandridge effectively portrays a charming yet frightening antagonist, filled to the brim with intimidation. And I also did feel some dread for some other characters as well as they became involved, so they do a solid job building a couple of the characters, which is something that I will always praise in a horror film. And our lead Charlie is a bit of a fucking doofus, if I'm honest, at least for a while. And I felt like I was watching a preteen work through problems rather than a 16 to 17-year-old, but I guess in such a situation, you never know how you'll act, especially at that age, so just to be fair. And then you have Ed, or Evil, and he was a bit grating in places, but does have some solid character moments as well, emotional ones and humorous ones. Probably my biggest compliment I can give this film is the special effects. I'll go over specifics again in spoilers, but the makeup for the vampires, they're just fantastic. Better than I would have expected, plus a separate transformation scene, and also a death that looks gruesome and just phenomenal in general. And props to that department, because, my god. But this is worth watching for any horror fan. It's a fun 80s vibe that captures the autumn season beautifully. I did not watch it before October ended, but it is still very reminiscent of fall in general in a lot of ways. So, I'll be watching this one again next year. 8 out of 10. And this next movie was a rewatch, but also on my rom-com list, so this is Legally Blonde. Reese Witherspoon plays a wealthy, seemingly deluded sorority girl who follows her ex-boyfriend to Harvard Law School and starts to slowly prove herself as more than a future fashion designer or model. And I didn't know what to expect going into this film for the first time, but Witherspoon portraying this seemingly ditzy, dumb blonde type who somehow gets into Harvard. But for one thing, she nails this role and gives our lead character, Elle Woods, a lot of emotion and personality that I just did not expect. And she is quickly judged by everyone, but she can put you in your place more easily than you would think. And I mean that in the best way possible, as she is really the nicest, least judgmental person until she meets a really vile adversary. And someone would try and humiliate her sometimes, and she would try and own it in the most enthusiastic way that she could, often with a smile on her face, which I respected. And despite the questionable realism of the whole journey, I enjoy watching it unfold because if you want realism, why would you go into a movie like this expecting much of that? But anyway. But the casting was rather good. Witherspoon and Jennifer Coolidge had fantastic chemistry all around. Their on screen relationship was one I latched onto quickly. And then Luke Wilson I like, despite how dorky he can kind of be as a person and as an actor, but he still has his own charm to him as well. And Wilson and Witherspoon each have separate moments in this film. This one moment each that were just iconic, and where they really got somebody who deserved to be got, and I will go into that once again in spoilers later, but watching those two scenes never gets old. But despite the flaws and the cheese, this is a feel-good movie, ultra satisfying. The personality and perkiness of our lead may drive some people away, as it is a big performance, but it did not bother me personally. If you don't like rom-coms, I'm unsure how you will feel, but I'm not necessarily the main demographic, of course, but there's still a lot to enjoy and a lot of laughs to be had. It's a cozy early 2000s film. 7 out of 10. The next film is a 2011 found footage horror project called The Tunnel. Released during probably the most popular era for found footage, the story follows a film crew exploring these abandoned underground tunnels after a government cover-up raises a lot of questions. And now I love conspiracy plots, especially in found footage form. There's so much you can do with it, the mystery and the terror of what is uncovered over time, and this film has some okay moments. They do build some tension with this underground area. There's a couple okay jump scares and creepy imagery, but overall this one just didn't break any new ground. In a year where found footage was arguably at its peak, it doesn't stack up with some of the others. I think the biggest downfall outside of that is likely the formatting of the different timelines, some of the editing choices. You have the found footage incident, the incident in question taking place, but then you get a lot of moments where they are interviewing the apparent survivors of the event, and that's not even a spoiler, because it is revealed within minutes. And with this being a work of fiction, this just doesn't hold any weight. The suspense and the audience's ability to become engrossed in the environment is hindered because they are constantly switching back and forth with the interviews, only revealing surface level thoughts on the matter. So it really adds nothing to the characters or to the story, it just simply feels like filler. And this is a common thing in horror, particularly found footage. But also these characters just aren't interesting enough to carry us through these slower moments. It takes a while to feel much of anything for what is happening. One of them is especially annoying, I would say, but I'll get to that. But if you like found footage and you're desperate for something else, this one is okay at best. The third act does pick up, and there are some, again, creepy moments, but overall it's just not enough to stand out or justify this being a full feature film. No regrets watching it, or in this case rewatching it. It's just not one for the top of the watch list. 5.6 out of 10. Okay, so this next one, I don't have the most to say about this, and I actually won't do a spoiler section for this movie, but it is the 2004 film, The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie. My wife and I just decided to take a trip down memory lane with this one. We both saw this one in theaters when we were younger, so it's just incredibly nostalgic for us. It still holds up as a solid kids film and comedy. Some subtle adult themes throughout here and there that work well. It's just a fun journey, watching iconic childhood figures goof off and somehow survive a perilous adventure. There's some lazy and ridiculous story elements, of course. No shit, it's a fucking kids movie, so I'm not going to focus on any of that. The most important aspects are that it was funny, it had heart, it explored important themes for these characters, and it's one with a lot of rewatchability, even to this day. Maybe the few bits of animal nudity that they kept interjecting got a bit weird in places, but I guess it is what it is. 7.5 out of 10. Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, is a modern-day classic I kept putting off, and that finally came to an end. As this coming-of-age film inspired by a true story hit a lot of marks that it should have. It's funny, it's fast-paced without rushing the characterization, some important themes such as identity, purpose, loneliness, these are all hit beautifully throughout without delving into something being overly bleak. You feel for these characters in a way without it lingering too long or bogging down the story, and just the acting ability beautifully assists with all this as well. And the dynamic between Frank Abagnale Jr. and Carl Hanratty as young escape artist and fraud and overly serious FBI agent was an amusing one, especially on the surface. I definitely had some laughs, but I also liked how the similarities between them came to light slowly as the story unfolded. And at nearly 2.5 hours, the story rarely drags, and time went by impressively quick. We got most of the characterization we needed, while keeping things moving. 8.8 out of 10. Okay, so now on to spoilers. If you don't want any specifics to be discussed before you get to watch them, stop here, and please come back if you want to hear some more detailed opinions. So otherwise, let's just get started again with the Beauty Queen Killer miniseries. Not sure how much to say, Chris Wilder was a sick piece of shit. The most scary killers and criminals are the ones who look the least harmless and are the most friendly on the surface because manipulation is insane. And as far as the most notorious serial killers, Ted Bundy is probably the one that scares me the most because of the unwavering charm that he maintained. Now, of course, I would not have been a target of him, but just knowing convincing people like that are out there doing these heinous things is just truly horrifying. But outside of that, the main thing I want to touch on was the controversy with Tina, the 9-day survivor. And given close to no free will and, had the dread of turning into a hotel each night just to be violated again and again, with scars that she still has to see to this day, it was just tough watching her read through the reports that she gave all those years back, because she kept coming across things, these traumatic moments that she had forgotten about, blocked out, whatever, and it would kind of traumatize her all over again. But plus other victims were hard in their own ways to watch as well. Wilder is dead, and he left behind no clues as to the whereabouts of the missing women whose bodies never turned up. And just a woman lost her mom at the age of 4 because Wilder just point blank shot her because he wanted her car and gave it no other thought. But her daughter, is here being interviewed this time around. Then there was a big conversation of Tina tricking a woman named Dawn in the same way that she was tricked, because Wilder would kill her if she did not comply with the trap. And this is where things got kind of messy with people saying she shouldn't have brought someone else into this all despite the consequences, and she was told to approach Dawn on her own and talk to her. Why didn't she warn her? Why didn't she run and yell with Dawn despite Wilder having a gun supposedly at all times? And they even steal Dawn's car, and he allows Tina to drive it by herself behind them. Why didn't she try and drive away and call for help? There are all these questions, and they are somewhat complex in a way, but I just found it hard to completely, disregard Tina's reflection and reactions on the matter. Could she have done something differently? I mean, yeah, maybe. But for one thing, she was 16 at the time, still a literal child. And she also had an abusive history before this, which for most people like that brings a lot of reactions that don't always make sense to others. Shutting down, going into survival mode, which often doesn't involve a lot of fighting. Unless it's happened to you, I don't think it's fair to assume you would know what you would do or how you would react. It's just not. And despite how cut and dry it may seem on the surface. So was it bad Tina helped bring Dawn into her world for a couple days? Oh yeah, that was bad, but it's not easy to truly think through these things. And again, she was a child. Not a full excuse, but my brain at 16, and then now, about 12 years later, they're very different. And this gal was an experienced criminal, experienced manipulator, race car driver. There were no cell phones, no GPS. She could have run, but there was no time to look at a map or anything like that, so risking it and getting caught would have likely been a death sentence. So maybe I'm kind of rambling here, but at the end of the day, despite my immediate reactions to anything that I saw unfold on screen, this was not an easy thing to judge. It isn't. Could you still be skeptical of Tina's decisions? I suppose you could, but I am really tired of people heartlessly interjecting their opinions on a matter when you have no idea what the certain experience is like and how somebody else felt in that moment. And I just felt deeply for all the victims, as I would hate to see anyone in my life be affected by this. So maybe if I was Dawn or any of the other victims or the family members, I might also be questioning others and Tina and feeling jealous of Tina's outcome. I mean, yeah, it's not fair, but such a situation will bring up selfish feelings, whether we want them to or not. It's part of being human, so I guess you'll just have to make your own opinion on the matter, but all I will encourage is to go into other people's experiences with an open mind and not be quick to judge or ask these inappropriate questions without truly considering their possible viewpoints on things. So, next review. Well, damn. This transition feels especially comforting after all that. A true crime doc to a rom-com now. Talk about emotional whiplash. But anyway, once again, I enjoy these characters and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and I laughed pretty often. And one of the funniest things to me was Ben inviting Andy over for a home-cooked meal with lamb, and while he was busy, basically getting a metaphorical hard-on over his craft. She's just spreading her shit all over his apartment after only 4 days of dating. And his initial lack of awareness combined with all the cheesy shit she was planting just damn near had me rolling. And also Ben's friends, played by Thomas Lennon and Adam Goldberg, were an exceptional on-screen duo. Their dry, geeky humor just worked magnificently, especially when Andy crashed the boys' poker night. I also liked Kathryn Hahn as Andy's friend impersonating a therapist, just to piss off Ben further. And again, though, with the romance, there was definitely chemistry from the start between them. They predictably fell in love, and I'm fine with that. How else would this movie end? I just think the transition from the explosive arguments to fake couples therapy to a visit with Ben's family to romantic tension combined with shower sex, it just all felt a bit abrupt with the pacing. I think they knew they had a winning couple here in the writer's room, so they just kind of flipped that switch, kind of just whenever they felt like it. So while in the end it does work, it just almost feels a bit random when it starts to work. It doesn't ruin anything, just somewhat of a flaw even by rom-com standards, but of course they discover each other's secret and only really truly consider their own individual sides of it all at first, and they're both just hurt and just feeling sorry for themselves. And it makes sense to need time as they were, again, both very wrong in their intentions and how they handled everything in the cocky manner that they did. But they fell in love, forgave, they lived happily ever after, and that's fine. It was a fun time. I think it's worth a watch for sure. Next film. On to the spoilers for Fright Night. The pacing here was stellar, and they build these characters decently well, even for a horror film. Charlie is once again a dumbass, to be polite, in places, with how he went about trying to get help, jumping the gun too quickly, especially with the police detective early on, who was already in the house next door. But he and Vincent made a great team later when they toughened up to put an end to all of it and save Amy. Speaking of Amy, and also of Charlie being a dumbass again, she definitely did not deserve to be brought into all this, especially for Charlie at first with how he kind of neglected her and just kind of turned his back on her while he's focusing on this possible vampire scenario. But it got better, and it did help her hypnosis and almost transformation scene hit much harder when that third act rolled around, makes you feel for her more and want to see her rescue. And then the Ed or Evil character once again got under my skin some, but I think if they had focused just 1 or 2 more moments on his school and or home life, his eventual death maybe could have packed more of a punch. He's a weird kid, of course, that always acts like he's on speed or some other bad trip, but he was at the end of the day just an innocent-ish kid who just needed a break. And Jerry, the big fucking asshole he is, took advantage of that vulnerability. His wolf transformation was highly entertaining, but also simultaneously heartbreaking. And once again, these special effects were top-notch, especially for the time. The vampires were effectively iconic, especially the effects of the fangs on Amy. Holy shit. That is nightmare fuel. But the main effect was Jerry's lackey Billy's death. The man turns out to, I guess, be a vampire or half vampire, whatever the fuck, I can't tell, to be certain. But he disintegrates right there in front of Charlie and Vincent, and it was a gnarly but beautifully handled effect. Some of the things that compliment here, most notably the characters and the balancing of the tone, are things I often criticize with many horror films, so it was really refreshing to see the extra effort be put in here to give the story and adventure more weight. Next film. With Legally Blonde, it does have some questionable aspects. Elle Woods follows her ex Warner to Harvard and attends law school just to try and win him back. It's extreme, but I think it fits her character pretty well with how privileged she had been. She had to face reality really quickly, and she respectfully chose to adapt rather than to run. And she did work hard, and she got her good LSAT scores to get in, but was in the wrong major and even sent in a video essay instead of an actual essay, and the old waspy male Harvard board let her in. And I am sure that her being in a bikini half the video had nothing to do with it. But along the way, it was cool getting her perspective on different things other lawyers or law students looked over, no matter how naive the viewpoint may be at times. She is relatively pure at heart. Now, the 2 scenes I love that I referenced earlier, the first one was Luke Wilson. He's not a top comedian or anything, but I am entertained fairly often by his dry delivery. And Elle calls a witness out as a liar because he claimed to have an affair with her female client, even though she is getting gay vibes from him. And Luke Wilson takes her word and questions him. He casually asks some, clarifying questions. Then he just drops in the question, and your boyfriend's name is? To which the guy responds, Chuck. and he automatically catches him in that lie before he realizes he answered the question, which was just iconic. And then you get Wilson's dry response, "Oh, thank you very much." Then takes a seat, fucks off. Just that clever mindfuck to catch somebody off guard with just initially simple questions that they arrogantly answer. That's just a really cool moment. Then the second one is, of course, Elle's victory in court after her dirtbag professor is pushed out. She is a first-year law student, so her performance was, of course, shaky, on top of everything else. But she hears an error in the witness's perm routine that doesn't add up, and then she flies in and just attacks like a lawyer and gets that murder confession. It's just a badass moment. I can't lie. It's overall a satisfying movie where you can just turn off your brain and enjoy the characters and their quirky comedy that comes along the way. This was my second viewing of this film, and honestly, it's not going to be my last. So moving on to spoilers for the 2011 film The Tunnel. Yeah, it's being revealed immediately that Natasha and Steve survive, and are now giving these bland interviews on the incident, and it just doesn't do much for me. I know it's found footage, but I don't often like knowing who all survives right off the bat, or any big spoiler like that. I would rather just have the recorded footage, and if you're able to add something at the end, maybe do an interview at the end or something to wrap things up. I don't think it's often necessary. But the fact that these lackluster interviews feel close to half the runtime really got under my skin, because any tension that is built in the tunnels is maybe not destroyed, but it is severely cut down when we switch to this unnecessary narration. And on top of that, the characters just aren't likable enough to help with the emotional aspect. I know that's common in horror and found footage, but I just think it could have helped me to latch on to somebody. And it could have been worse for me, because I don't particularly care for reporters, typically. And Natasha was not a sympathetic character at all either. And I know she wasn't expecting monsters to be found, with going to such a sketchy environment. But you would think she would have told one person at least what they were doing. Somebody that she trusted to not rat them out right away. Or at least filled in the rest of the guys who went with her. But she told nobody, and fucked them over even worse. But I guess you have to have that one character in all found footage films. I guess. But the creature design, I think, is intentionally hard to make out. What you do see is largely unimpressive. There's a couple shots that work okay with it slowly entering a room sometimes. Or the scene where we see a crying homeless person and the creature slowly kills him while the crew is trying to stay quiet. So a couple scenes do work. Now I do find it hard to believe that the creature walked over, picked up a camera from off the ground, to record our crew without their knowledge at one scene. I mean, it's kind of creepy, and I kind of liked it at first, but after seeing the creature and how it behaves, I found it kind of hard to believe it would do such a thing, so it kind of just made the whole thing a bit goofier. There are a couple okay jump scares with it attacking, but they are overall pretty easy to see coming. I think they believe they had a good one toward the end, when one sprints up behind Pete before they get separated, but the way it's set up is almost comical. Just textbook, something is about to pop out. Just like the camera angle was on Pete, things suddenly went quiet as they had stopped running, and Pete just goes to say something, but he starts off saying something like, "Okay, now." And it was clear no thought was coming out of his mouth. Something is about to strike, and it does, and the effects of the creature were just too lacking for that to do much anyway. So just for an amateur low-budget project, it does seem to try. They had a vision, again, and I love the premise. I just disagree with many aspects of it. The tunnels, as a horror setting, are of course a phenomenal choice, but I just don't think they utilize it to its full extent. But that's me. The tunnel was fine, but not one I think I would visit again, now that I've finally rewatched it. And finally back to Catch Me If You Can. Again, I love the performances here. Leonardo DiCaprio brought his confidence to the table to portray this mostly suave and smooth-talking youth, who is a massive financial criminal, millions of dollars stolen in bad checks, prestigious degrees faked so he can have these respectable jobs. Pit this guy against a brooding FBI agent whose only joke is a knock-knock joke that ends in "go fuck yourself." But Frank's ability to get in and out of dangerous legal situations was impressive and fun to watch. Just an artist at work. Just how much of these individual things were true, I don't know, but it was really fun anyway. But outside of the wit, humor, action, I love the themes that were explored and how they connected and resonated with our lead characters. We get that insight into Frank's life. Nothing excuses what he did, but you do see why a kid in particular might go through some kind of extremes when introduced to a world of manipulation, especially by your own father, of all people. And Frank gets to where he has it all. Money, he has his looks, women, impressive jobs that he could just fake the shit out of. Yet at the same time, you just feel that emptiness. His parents' relationship crashed and burned. His dad was not a good influence on him, but he still wanted to impress him. His dad had his back, not turning him in, but I love the scene where Frank begs him to ask him to stop his crimes, and his dad essentially just does not take him seriously, saying that you'll never stop. And his mom remarries, and he just never felt that he got what he needed from his parents, and just really ran when things got to be at their worst, and he never stopped until he was caught. And then Carl is a hard ass and a rule follower, of course, but there was a subtle dynamic between him and Frank that was really nice. He was hell-bent on catching him, as it is his job. They also at the same time kind of built this unorthodox relationship. Carl wanted to bring him in back to the United States after he was arrested in Paris, and he showed subtle signs of caring for him, and ultimately he got a job with the FBI to serve out his prison sentence, and apparently became a millionaire down the road. But to back up, there are definitely loneliness issues and bonding issues on both sides, and that seemed to bring out Carl as this, father figure to him, I feel like. Because Carl had a wife and a daughter, but he is divorced and has rarely seen his daughter. And then Frank and Carl can kind of relate to that emptiness and that bitterness, and it's played out in a way where just they ultimately have this mutual respect for each other, flaws and all. And the impressive casting brought all this to life even more, in a more stunning way, and just that family element throughout was really sad, but it was explored in a beautiful manner that had so much strength and emotion to a really wild coming-of-age story. So, Catch Me If You Can is a stellar crime drama that is really important to watch, and it just has all the elements of a memorable story, and it is simply just fun to sit through. Okay, so after all that, those were my quick-ish reviews for films I watched this week. I hope this was an enjoyable format, and I know I had quite a jarring range of genres here, but I just kind of like it that way most of the time, so make sure to follow me for more. I am on Spotify and YouTube, and I'm also now on TikTok, posting daily. So, check it out, and I'll see you next time on The Entertainment Room.